Our next guest, another legend, a local legend. Rowan Reid is said to be a forester amongst farmers. He won the Australia Eureka Prize for his farmer course, the Australian Master Tree Grower, which he continues to deliver around Australia and internationally to support farmer and community forestry. Rowan's family farm is in the Otway Ranges of southern Victoria, where he's a co-founder of one of Australia's most successful land care groups, the Otway Agroforestry Network. More than 12,000 visitors have toured his Bambara Agroforestry farm, which is set up as a 42-hectare outdoor classroom for farmers, scientists, students and tree lovers, and a living lab for his own ongoing learning. Rowan's beautiful book is Heartwood, The Art and Science of Growing Trees for Conservation and Profit. It's out the front if you haven't seen it yet, for sale. I bought a copy of his neighbours and co-conspirators, the Stewarts, when I was in the Otways. Youngest daughter Christy will be up next to talk next gen regen. But for now, let's hear from an old legend. Please welcome Rowan Reid.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation and obviously the support to come over to Western Australia from the organisers. It's been fantastic. I often come over to Western Australia, and before COVID we came many times, as I'll show you. If I press that button, does that go forward? Yep. My name's Rowan Reid, I'm a forester, and don't leave the room. But I'm also a forest scientist, so I try to explain when I'm at a dinner party with people in Melbourne who have no connection with the land, what the difference is between a lumberjack and a forest scientist, and I sort of equate them to marine science and fishing. And it's true that forestry has got a bad rap, but I've spent 20 years at Melbourne University teaching in this field. I left there in 2010 to focus on our own activities on the farm and in our community, but I'm still passionate about the science of forestry. That doesn't mean I'm passionate about the way that forestry is being expressed in Australia. And both in Victoria and Western Australia, we've seen the call and the end of native forest logging. Anyone like that? Clearfield native forest logging? No, I won't try and defend that. Nor this big-scale industrial forestry where trees are grown as a crop, and my peers keep telling me it's just another crop, it's just like wheat, it takes that 30 years to grow. And I say, well, what farmer do you know who'll plant trees, wait 30 years, and then put it back to the country like it was when they started? It's like Abe saying, I want to go back, after I've done all this work, to what the soil was before. I'm more passionate about how we can use forestry to create beauty in the landscape. And for the old hippies amongst you, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance spoke about the ugliness of technology. But in the Harley Davidson, there was beauty because the technology combined with the art had created a machine that delivered more than just a form of transport. And to me, the quote at the bottom, which I've taken and adapted from that book, that forestry can be beautiful. There's nothing ugly about it inherently. That garden, the Royal Botanic Gardens in Melbourne, is the application of forest science. So if we take it to the farm, I'm just passionate that forestry on farms can be beautiful. Anyone know that farm? It's in Bridgetown. And it's a site where the landholder has created a forest in a farming landscape that reflects their passion and interests. And you can see it in that with regard to a whole range of different values that come from that landscape. So agroforestry to me, and I don't know why people think there's only one definition for these things, so make up your own. So I've made up my own. It's farmers growing trees for the reasons that are important to them. It's not about someone else judging that. So in this picture, there is a farmer. Jenny created that landscape, and she did it in a way that reflects her interest. This is a research site in Canada where black walnuts are grown in amongst crops of soybeans. I've travelled the world and gone to as many of these sites as possible. But that is not agroforestry. That's just a research site where people are looking at tree interactions with crops. It's not agroforestry because there's no farmer involved in that. There's no expression of what an aspiration that landholder has, how they want to use trees in their landscape to reflect their particular interests. But science is good. It can inform the decisions that you as landholders make. But the problem we've had in so many of the applications of new ideas into farming is that people think they've got the answer. They've got the system. So my other hippie reference is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The supercomputer that'll tell you the answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. So you get that answer, you get the best system, you get told what species to grow, what crop to grow, how spacings to put them at, how to actually do the system, and you get the answer. But you haven't got the right question. So let's get back to the farmer and Jenny making those. We want to answer your questions. So the programs that we've developed, both the Otway Agroforestry Network and our Master Tree Grower program, have focused on offering to landholders ideas about technology, about systems, about science of tree growing, about forest science, and seeing how they can use that and adapt it to answer their own questions. Charles Massey, if you got up to page, 419? No, that's unfair. I keep meeting people who say, are you in Charles's book? And yes, we are. And so it talks about the Otway Agroforestry and our Master Tree Grower program. And I liked it because he could see that difference straight away. And he called this new form of agroforestry, this based on not just restoring the landscape function, but building economic, ecological, social resilience into community landscapes. He told us what he thought we were doing, and that excited us in terms of taking that forward, because that landscape we're dealing with is an ugly landscape. It's ugly for soil and water conservation, it's ugly for biodiversity, it's ugly for stock, shade and shelter. But most of all, as landholders, it's uncomfortable. It's not the landscape we want to pass on to the next generation. And almost every landscape that I visit, possibly because I get invited to look at landscapes where trees, whether it's low rainfall, high rainfall, tropical, up in East Timor or down in Tasmania, I don't think I've seen a farm where the landholder wouldn't be able to achieve their aspirations with some or better tree management on the property. We may only be talking 5% of the farm, but in a way that actually supports and builds what we've been talking about at this conference, the resilience and the biology of that farming landscape. My own family farming history goes, that's a house my grandfather built up at Walgett on a sheep station, and he purchased that farm from his father's estate, as they did back then, so we know exactly what he purchased because it's all written down. And this property, because my grandfather died when my mum was only 4 years old, so she hardly knew him, this fence line on the property demarcates the difference between my mother and my uncle, the two shared owners of that property for over 50 years. I'd like to say my mother's on the other side of the fence. My uncle's on this side of the fence. And during the 70s, the arguments at the Christmas dinners down in Melbourne was we should be clearing more country and putting it into crops. And my mum, with tears in her eyes, was trying to argue, no, let's keep the landscape as a perennial landscape. She mightn't have used those terms, but she said, don't do it. Because she could see that in that landscape, it had the values of retaining ecological processes, possibly not perfectly, possibly not all the species, but the diversity underpinned the productivity, that the farm had made money in good years, over 100 years, from farming that perennial landscape. So when you talk about putting perennials into an economic landscape, it's nothing new. Actually, it's nothing new in Australia or most countries in the world. But the other thing that drove her, and what she taught me, and what brings a tear to my eye, is the fact that clearing that landscape would obviously break the song lines as well, the connection that people had in that landscape. So it's cultural, it's environmental, and it's economic in that landscape. But Walgett's a long way from the beach, so I didn't choose to go up there and take over the farm. My choices were made in this forest, a red ironbark forest on the coast, which is now part of a national park, but has been logged for 100 years. Gee, it needs some work, but it's not going to happen in a national park. But this divided track in the forest, that relates to a poem from Frost, gives you two choices. I could follow a pathway where tree growing on farms was about profit, plantations on farms. We know how to do forestry, we just got to get farmers to do it correctly. or that we actually have a pathway for conservation. We lock up farmland. We only plant locally native species. We only do it for conservation outcomes, and we use it as a band-aid to try and support some of the damage that we're doing in the farming landscape. My interest was another pathway, bidding through the undergrowth and seeing whether we could marry those two things and we could start making conservation a result of actually growing trees for profit. Or more importantly, the other way around, growing trees for conservation and to support agriculture, but being able to profit from that, and a marriage of the two. So when Mum and her brother decided they'd sell the farm because none of the 8 grandchildren wanted to move to Walgett, she made me an offer in a little cottage in Nairobi where we caught up when Claire and I were backpacking around the world back in 1986. And she gave me a simple question. She said, I will give you the opportunity to purchase farmland if you can give me a good reason why you need some farmland. And I slept on that night, and then the next morning I said, I want to make forestry. I was a forest scientist, master's degree. I was passionate about forest science. But my brother had been a dairy farmer in a community that hated forestry, where foresters had purchased farmland and put it under pine plantations, where large-scale logging and native forest had occurred on the next ridge. I wanted to make forestry attractive to those farmers and to see what they could do with it in some way. So she gave me my share, or an opportunity, and all I could get was that 42 hectares of degraded land in about a 700 mil rainfall, what you're going to see. Dropped significantly during the drought and hasn't quite got back up. So that's what we looked at in 1987, a little bit of remnant bush, but that's all regrowth after the war. So it's effectively a fully cleared landscape. In approaching this, and this is what I try to present to my colleagues in forestry, to make something attractive to a new player, you've got to change what you're talking about. Forestry itself had to change and be something new in that landscape. So we want to plant trees for conservation to support agriculture. This might be the 5% of the farm for shelter belts, a little bit more for degraded land along watercourses. It might be the unproductive rocky areas on the farm. Whereas my peers are often looking for the best land close to the front gate to get the higher productivity from trees, the landholders saw opportunities in planting some of the worst country or the most unproductive, or where they knew the trees from day one would start supporting their agricultural enterprises. But the difference, and what I wanted to explore, is can you start then managing those trees, which despite being in a mixed species planting along a riparian corridor, despite being in a shelter belt or on a rocky site, could be commercially harvested to produce timber and other products, but timber was the biggest challenge, obviously, in some sort of way. So we started exploring that and working with other landholders like the Stewarts in doing so. This is where those unexpected outcomes come to play. When you start planting trees, as most of you know, the early years are just about keeping the things alive and trying to keep things going. But it's about 14 to 15 years into a planting where things start to change. You start noticing the forest dynamics as taking on a role of its own. That you're not so much running the show as becoming the conductor of an orchestra, which is multi-species, all growing at different rates, and things are interacting, and you're starting to observe and respond and guide that as it develops. And what also I found, by not having a plan, is that I started developing a landscape that looked different, that didn't look like forestry, it didn't look like land care, but it started to feel like it fitted. And as Abe said, it became a reflection of me. And that sort of excited me, because I thought, well, the Stewarts, the Robinson Cosses and the other people in our community, they're not me. So their landscapes would also look different. Just like Jenny's over here was a reflection of her interests. So we have these multiple objectives. We try to fit them together like a jigsaw puzzle. We try to manage the conflict and maximise the complementarity between these different objectives. And, in my case, started to explore whether timber could be a byproduct of that. I love the discussion about sustainable table and food, because I keep saying, well, what about the table itself? I love tables because they use a lot of wood, and then you get your grandchildren sitting around them at a dinner time, and I'm the one at the end with a glass of red, just almost with a tear in my eye, saying, this is what family and tree growing is about. And it's come into play now as we start to harvest the timber from the trees we planted for the conservation of shelter and aesthetics and fire protection. And during COVID, perfect timing for me, we're trapped on the farm, planning to build a house. The price of timber was going up. You couldn't buy framing timber. And we started harvesting and building. All the timber there, other than the LVL, which is actually from Western Australia, that goes across some bifold doors, was planted on the farm and didn't go out the front gate. And that's part of our house. We've almost finished the frame now, got the windows in, we're getting to lock up, and we're starting to learn a hell of a lot about the engineering qualities of the timber that we're actually growing. I've got my board-formed concrete fireplace. The wood grain in that is actually part of one of our redwood trees. So I needed timber grain to be into everything. But back in the paddocks, I started focusing and started thinking about what my key message is for landholders. How people can change the way they view forestry, whether it's a neighbour's, whether it's a native forest, whether it's urban forest, or it's on your own property. I think we've lost track of one key guiding principle, which comes back to the active engagement of people in the management of that forest over time. Our forests are managed forests, and they're managed to reflect the aspirations and interests and knowledge and ideas that I and our family have of ourselves, what we want that to achieve. Touching a forest can be a beautiful way to achieve a range of outcomes, and that is nothing new. This little boy up in East Timor rolling the tyre down the hill, when I filmed this, it occurred to me, I think that's my key. That's my message to people. That's what we can learn from Indigenous culture. That's what Bill Gammett was talking about with the greatest state on earth. It's a managed landscape. It's a community that's running with their forests over time and taking it where they want to go. We have this conservation mindset that suggests that the little boy, the game, is to stand at the top of the hill and roll the tyre off and laugh if it goes that way or that way. Or worse than that, we think if you roll it off the top of the hill and let nature take its course, somehow it's going to go to some pristine outcome which is the same every time. It's not. Nature is a series of ecological processes that interact. It doesn't have a destination in mind. In fact, a lot of our forests are actually getting to a stalemate now where they're not providing the ecological and environmental outcomes that they could because of where they started, what we did to them, and the fact we did let go. So I'm really keen on this running with the forest idea. So that's what we've been doing. We didn't just plant, stand back, and I've got a perfect land care planting, or as my peers do, plant, stand back and get a pine plantation, then go in there 15 years later and try to fix it up with a bit of thinning. We ran with the trees all the time, so the blackwood that we plant, we pruned and shaped it as it grew to try and improve its timber quality over time. We studied the wood colour from our young trees. 4-year-old, we're getting good colour, build up confidence, get ideas about whether or not we're doing the right management, feed that back into the future management of those trees. And now we're harvesting blackwood that we planted. This is a 30-year-old tree, and finding, actually it's not too bad. We've actually, there's some of this timber might actually end up in a blackwood guitar as part of a project that we're working on, which excites me. The rest is going to go into the house if I can convince Claire that black is okay. There's a bit of a pale trend in timber at the moment. I'm trying to feed in some coloured woods into the house system as well. And one of my greatest interests is challenging people about riparian areas. We have a very strong focus right around Australia of giving farmers money to lock up riparian areas and plant Indigenous plants, let go of the system, maybe do some weed control, but not engage with that forest with regard to trying to get an outcome. Far too many of the plantings are dominated now by eucalypts, which bend out in towards the paddock and they suppress the growth and build up the fuel loads. But in our forest, we planted 4 times the number of eucalypts along this creek system as they've currently got. And now we're taking all the eucalypts out to transition that forest into a temperate rainforest. So we're into planting and using a lot of rainforest species to try and build up a cool rainforest, which is a lower fire threat along the riparian areas, and we're harvesting the timber as we go. So we regularly harvest quite large trees now that have been managed along the riparian area, and I'm very proud of this on Gardening Australia. I wanted to get falling trees on Gardening Australia, particularly out of a conservation zone. And so that, I would argue, is an act of conservation. You can see I've got quite a challenge when I go to a dinner party in Melbourne, the eastern suburbs. We grew that log. Through the millennium drought, where rainfall dropped below 600 mils, on a very heavy sodic clay soil. The difference was we managed it. It was more in a parkland, not a forest. It wasn't in a plantation. The next tree to around that was about 15 metres away. The diameter is over 83 centimetres at midpoint along that, which means that that 6 metre log has more than 3.5 cubic metres of wood in it, and we're getting out of that all the timber surrounds, hopefully the stairs, and the whole stairs for the house and a few other parts from it. Through the management of that log, we removing branches timely, managing competition, we can get knot-free timber, which I think is now, in terms of density and cleanness, similar to old-growth forests. The difference is our growth rings are further apart, but we can go into the science of that a little bit later. We've been drying timber in a solar kiln, trying to get down to that 12 to 14% and even lower in terms of the system. We've sold timber to, we sold one tree, about a cubic metre of wood for $2,000 to Mark Tuckey in Melbourne. That was a messmate eucalypt. He turned it into about $20,000 worth of furniture. And I asked, when I went into the showroom, are you telling anyone that this is planted wood? And he goes, well, not really, because all that over there is not. He doesn't really want to have that distinction. And that didn't worry me so much as people would make their own choice. And if they could see that, and they couldn't read those boards and tell that it came from farmed wood, then they will buy it because it met their requirements. It did the job, and it was a beautiful timber as a result. And we know that all this timber is locking up carbon. I mean, we all know that, but do we all accept it? It's part of the way of doing it. So that little block of Eucalyptus globulus contains the carbon dioxide that you could fit in that beach ball. And as the comment was made in that movie by Terry, those trees that you see have come out of thin air. I love that comment. I might use that more often. Because that's what it is. It's actually just carbon drawn out of the atmosphere and put into solid products. And we've got, around the world, people trying to invent machines to do this. And well, obviously you've got trees. But the difference is all the carbon programs don't acknowledge that we can actually take that wood out of the system, store it, and grow more. So this is one day's work when the trees were 22 years old. We harvested 10 trees that were individually selected by a veneer buyer. They sent the logs to China in a container. They came back as veneer. And this is one of the buildings. Another one's the tax office. All that pale-coloured veneer on the back wall and the pale-coloured veneer on the roof is actually from our riparian creek planting. The ATO, Australian Tax Office building, you ever try going to the tax office and say, I want to go upstairs? They don't want to let you in. So the building guy came down. He said, what, that timber's yours? And I said, yeah, take me up. So I went up and had a look. All the walls on every story above the first floor was actually covered. That was 10 trees, a very high value product. And I got over $300 per tree, which worked out all right. That was over 10 years ago. Where those trees come from is still locking up carbon. So rather than being a carbon sink, planting trees to lock carbon up in some fashion, it's actually a carbon factory. You can produce carbon every year. Every year you can harvest more and grow more where it was. It's just, in a sense, like a product off the farm. Whereas our carbon programs now, if you sell the carbon, you carry a liability for many years into the future to retain and hold that carbon. We need to get this system right that drives and supports the productivity and the management of these systems. We're growing a lot of New South Wales species now. We're in Victoria. Temperatures have gone up 1.4 degrees in our area. The threat of fire and heat are obviously key, so I'm looking north. And so silky oak, I'm manipulating the growth as it develops. It's a great tree to do that because of the horizontal branching you get in that species. It produces a beautiful timber that has a very strong ray cell, like she oaks do as well. And we started noticing the trees were affected by sort of scratchings during the winter. So I set up the night vision camera and the sugar gliders. They actually farm these trees, and the Australian red cedar as well. They scratch into the tree. That encourages the tree to release the sap then they come back and they eat the sap. So this one that's landed has actually either taken a little bite, clambered it up the tree a little bit further, done a scratch to encourage it to come out. It's had a bit of an impact on trees, so I've actually lost the heads of a couple of trees where there's been too much grazing on it. But overall, we have a very strong population of sugar gliders. A key indicator, not a species you can get if you don't have trees. Like tree creepers, you need trees. There is elements of the system that build up, and that's been exciting to see come back. We have a number of different she oaks that have that beautiful timber. One of our most beautiful is the drooping she oak, but I come over regularly and I've taken some home of your rock she oak and forest she oak. They're beautiful timbers. And we know the connection between she oaks and the black cockatoos. Whereas the yellow-tailed cockatoos we have adapted to eat pine cones, radiata pine, so there's no shortage of them in the landscape. Our glossy blacks and red-tailed blacks are suffering because they've become dependent on a couple of species, including the she oaks. And I understand the situation's the same here. So rather than ban anyone from planting or cutting down a she oak, imagine if she oak forestry was promoted in Western Australia, there'd be she oak trees everywhere. As many as pine trees possibly. If you people were actually encouraged to grow and sell and promote that locally native timber. Your other one that I grow is the Western Australian river banksia. Beautiful tree, largest, fastest growing of the banksias. The timber has the ray cell like the other species, and it produces a beautiful flower which you'll see could have a market value as well. But I grow it for the timber because of that stunning qualities. And the bee fodder which it supports as well. So this idea that taking degradation and saying I want to move forward and create a new landscape can be a conservation outcome, delivering agricultural benefits as you go, but also generating a profit and feeling good about that is a great opportunity. Wooden waterways, messy farms, great thing, messy farms. We've got to sell the message a bit better. And what we're finding is the antechinus and other animals that are coming back because we've got the messy farm supporting that. Stumps. I love celebrating stumps when we harvest these trees. We don't pull out the stumps because that's where I want trees along the creek system. But the stump, if it dies, becomes a mass of rotting wood that stores moisture, and all the trees in the vicinity grow better because they've got like a sponge of moisture available to them, plus all the root channels that become available. Many of our stumps don't die though, they stay alive through root connections, not fungus, root connections through root grafting, and they sustain. So when you cut a tree down, the root system is actually immediately commandeered by the tree next to it, and the water that used to travel up the tree you cut down is now directed over to that tree. That tree benefits from less competition, more light, and a bigger root system, and it grows faster. That's how we achieve these very large trees in no time. There's a place for exotics in the landscape. This is our fire break to the north of our house. It's a cool area. We find it attractive. It includes black walnut, which may take 60, 80 years to grow. It's a very slow-growing tree. That son just had his second child on the weekend. And the trees aren't much bigger. But the trees are returning a dividend because I'm harvesting the black walnut seed and sending it around the eastern states. I can't send it to WA. And so these trees become a commercial market. So they're planted for one purpose, and they're trying to deliver an ongoing reward, but a reward that can extend to the child of that child. And that's exciting me even more. That's what it looks like today in terms of a cool fire break on the farm, cool in many respects. The poplars you see there I'm starting to take out to give space for the black walnuts, as you can see on the right, and Australian red cedar in there as well. Another exotic that I plant for conservation, exotics for conservation, that's a bit radical. The only place I see a boobook owl during winter is actually in our coast redwoods when I'm pruning them. They love hiding during the day away from the small birds. But our primary reason for planting that tree is because we have sodic clay soils with a high sodium content. The sodium binds with the clay, makes it highly dispersible, so you get these tunnels underneath the soil. The eucalypts, as you can see here, the pines, the blackwoods, and all the other natives that we plant, none of them can grow in the clay, but the redwoods can. So underneath most plantings, we have spewing water coming out during a storm. Underneath the redwoods, same storm, just next valley along, with evidence of water, tunnel erosion above and below these trees. None of the water can go through a tunnel because of the root mat in there. The trees have actually changed the chemistry of the soil, phytoremediation, and we're getting soil holding capacity plus producing wood plus generating a special place on the farm. And sodic soils are widely distributed through the country. Redwood's not going to grow in all those areas, but we need vegetative solutions that are productive that deliver that. Oaks are a fascination because of their fire protection value. That's a fire break as well. We plant a lot around the house and the buildings, and the fodder value of them during the autumn feed gap has proved valuable, as well as some of the wildlife values we get from that. I've learnt a lot about how to grow oaks from travelling to the UK. I measured this tree, paced out the distance to the next one, came back and had to cut down half my trees because the faster you grow oak trees, the better the wood is. We've known this for hundreds of years. On our farm, there is no new genetics and no chemicals or nothing magic. I'm just using very old forest science and applying it to a new landscape with new aspirations. So this is harvesting, thinning out the oak forest to try and make it grow faster and growing shiitake mushrooms from that. So in the book, where I'm trying to make forestry attractive to people like yourself and the wider community, there is no chapter on Pinus radiata. There's no chapter on blue gums. Because I'm getting challenged by my peers for this, but you don't even mention pines. And I said, well, if I did, most people would say I was defending pine trees. But we grow pine trees. But we grow them very differently to how you'd see in the landscape. And now that we're harvesting them, milling them up and producing, has anyone seen pine timber look like that? When we had the building surveyor came around to look at our pine and during the framing inspection, he said, bloody hell, you're using furniture-grade timber to build your framing timber, and you're going to cover it with plaster. This is ridiculous. But if you go into Bunnings, you've all seen this. In the Bunnings store, all the pine inside the big green shed looks like that, and it's twice the value of the pine out in the yard, which is full of knots, and all that comes from New Zealand. Or the plywood you see like that comes from Chile. Same species managed a different way to get a higher quality product. And for us as small growers, whether we're using the timber ourselves, we want to market it, we have to get very high quality. We have to invest in the forest, not in the value adding after the trees are harvested. We have to make forestry viable on difficult, small, integrated, multi-purpose, mixed species plantings. We're going to have to produce high quality timber. So that's where we focus on the management of the trees to get that timber outcome. So as a result, we can actually grade our timber. We've done a grading course. The hardwood on the left-hand side, farm grown, is F17. It would be more, but that's all I have to achieve, so I stamped it as F17. Visual stress grading is VSG on that. Got my own number, so I've got my own rating on there. And that's what the inspector wants to see, that you've graded the timber. You can do it visually. If you prune the tree, you get much higher grade and more of it out of the timber as well. So we'll finish just on community. And that's the point that Charles picked up about this agroforestry. It's not just a couple of examples on individual farms meeting individual outcomes. To change the biodiversity and carbon in the whole landscape, we've got to engage heaps of people. That's our property there. The blue areas are some satellite imagery trying to work out landscape change since 1990. That's the Stewart farm that you're going to hear about next. And these are the many other landholders in our community who have been planting trees for the reasons that they want. Some are just Indigenous plantings for conservation. Some are just block plantings for chipwood and timber. But most are actually multi-purpose and mixed interests through that. And our network, we argue, is a community of change. We engage and support landholders doing things that they want to do. We don't say, you should plant this because this is the best tree for biodiversity or the best tree for timber. We say, this is what we've done, what do you think? And make up your own size. So we're trying to support farmer decision making. We don't employ, and this disappoints some of my university students, we don't employ graduates to be facilitators because they won't stay in the landscape. The best ones will move on. We actually employ experienced tree growers as a way of rewarding them for their tree growing success. We offer them a job. Do you want to be a mentor? Do you want to be a leader? Do you want to organise an event? And then pay them to do that within our community. We don't give any money for demonstrations or on-ground works. I think we're the only land care group in the country that's had $3 million worth of money and not handed it out for trees and fences. We invest in people. If we had a grant program, then we'd be deciding which trees need to go where for what reasons. But we want the landholder to make that decision. So we run Master Tree Grower courses, we do site visits, we provide mentoring. We teach someone how to paint, not tell them what to paint in that landscape. We run the Master Tree. How many Master Tree Growers are there in the room here? Oh, a couple? I'll give you a badge. I've got some if you haven't. We've got the badges. So there has been about 35 programs here, right from the wheat belt down to Esperance, many around Bridgetown and one just locally in this area, where we're trying to just engage people and help them explore what those opportunities are, trying to find mechanisms to get younger people in the community in our network. We run programs just for the youth. And then some of those people then get jobs within the network to act as mentors and supporters, and Christy's one of those in our landscape. So mentoring is, we heard so much about it, but we pay farmers to talk to farmers. When we first applied for money to do this, one of the bureaucrats said to me, "Don't farmers already talk to each other?" And all the social research says exactly what we heard yesterday, that landholders will be supported in their decision making by people they respect as peers who have had some of the experience, who can help them, not tell them what to do, but help them explore the opportunities that might suit them, and that you feed science and marketing, industry and networking into that conversation. We call it the intellectual infrastructure within our community. And then see what pops out of that. And when you're looking at change over 30 years that we've been going now, there wasn't much in the first few years. You're just talking to people, running events, taking them to sawmills, getting them to meet people. But then suddenly there's a takeoff, and that's the bit that people don't see. Whereas if you start paying for trees in the ground, you can say, oh, there's trees in the ground. But will it keep going in terms of getting that real change? You can pick the politician, obviously. When Tony Burke came down to visit, we had no money. Everyone was just working as volunteers for the group. And we had no money because the government said, this is a biodiversity program. You have to apply for money to plant trees for biodiversity. We kept saying, no, we want money to talk to farmers about what they want and to help their decision making. And so we got Tony Burke down, and it was during the MIS scheme where farms were being converted to plantations. And we bought him some new gumboots and got him out in the paddock, who had to rent a crowd of farmers around him. And he said, I get it. We need 10% of every farm under trees, not 10% of farms converted to trees. And that, we said, well, what would you invest in to achieve that? You've got to invest in people and community to develop that. And you get a diversity of forests that reflects the diversity of people in that landscape. And that's what gives it resilience. That's what gives it the next step. When we have failures, we love to call them learning experiences. Hopefully we haven't planted too much of one species that had problems. We've had species that have gone backwards as a result of the drought. But we've all sort of said, well, we'll learn from that and share that knowledge, and we learn from other people's gaining of that. So the landscapes we'll see, and you'll see this story, this farm in the next story, are diverse. They're not just plantings of exotics for timber production. They're not just indigenous plantings. In fact, none of the plantings in that picture are actually what most people do or get funding for, because it's a unique design that integrates the values. But I think you can see the carbon in the broader landscape. I think you can see the impact on biodiversity and corridors and connectivity in that, and the effect on water flows and nutrient trapping and all the other benefits that we know trees provide. So Charles actually said very nicely on the next page this comment about possibly the most innovative, constantly evolving and forward-looking farmer-driven agroforestry network in the nation. And anyway, so that's not very difficult, is it? But we hope to build on that and share our experience around the country and encourage other groups who want to start exploring that notion of how you might invest in people, not trees, because trees don't change landscapes, people do. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope
Thanks a lot, Rowan. That is just Amazing. It was actually Charlie's book that brought you to my attention first, so I made it to 420 pages in. And I'll admit, just amongst this room, I haven't finished it either, frankly. Keep that to yourselves.